Welcome to another video from explainingcomputers.com. This time we're going to take a look at this, the Odroid N2 Plus. As I'm sure you've guessed, this is an updated version of the Odroid N2, which I reviewed on this channel just under a year ago. And indeed it shares the same box. The box still says Odroid N2, but I can assure you inside this box it's an Odroid N2 Plus. So let's go and take a closer look. Right, here we have our Odroid N2 Plus, which I purchased from Odroid Co UK for £74.92. This is a 2GB RAM version of the board, and it costs $63 plus taxes from the manufacturer's hard kernel in South Korea. There's also a 4GB RAM version of the N2 Plus, which sells for £90.91 in the UK and $79 plus taxes from hard kernel, and I'm going to make no attempt to link together the relationship between those pound and dollar prices. It's worth noting that supplies of this board do seem to be limited. It keeps coming in and out of stock, and at the time of making this video, the 2GB model was the only one I could get hold of. Anyway, with all that said, let's open this thing up. It's a very easy unboxing, like that. Well, hey, there we are. Inside we've got the board, sort of encased in a bit of a bubble wrap like that. There we are, let's get it out. There we are. Unwrap it, you fool. There we are, that's much easier. And as you can see, it comes in what they call the case, which is basically a top, because there's a very large heatsink on the bottom of an N2 or an N2 Plus here, and that will slide off like that. Oh, it's two pieces. There we are, other one like that. And there we are, we have our N2 Plus. And I think the first thing we should do is to compare this board with some other single board computers. And so over here, I've got this Raspberry Pi 4. And if we put the Odroid N2 down next to the Raspberry Pi 4, you'll see it's got a significantly larger form factor. And that of course means this is bigger than many other boards, those that have a Raspberry Pi form factor, such as, for example, this Odroid C4. But, of course, the board most obviously we need to compare the Odroid N2 Plus with is the Odroid N2, which I have over here. So, let's put the Odroid N2 Plus down next to the Odroid N2, and we can play a game of spot the differences. Although, in fact, the first difference and the biggest difference is one we can't physically spot because it concerns the system on a chip, which is under the board and is here, therefore, sandwiched between the board and the heatsink. Now, both of these boards have got an Amlogic S922X system on a chip with a big little architecture, which includes 4 ARM Cortex-A73 cores and 2 ARM Cortex-A53 cores. However, the original N2 has a revision A version of the S922X, whilst the N2 Plus has a revision C version of the chip. And the practical implication of that is that on the N2, the A73 cores are clocked at 1.8 GHz, they can overclock to 2 GHz, and the A53 cores are clocked at 1.9 GHz and can overclock to 2 GHz. Whereas, if you're still with me, on the N2 Plus, the A73 cores are clocked at 2.2 GHz rather than 1.8, and they can overclock up to 2.4 GHz, and the A53 cores are at the same 1.9 GHz overclocking to 2 GHz speed. So the practical implication of the upgrade from the N2 to the N2 Plus is we've taken an already powerful ARM-based single-board computer and made it even more powerful by making its 4 most powerful cores run a little bit faster. The second difference between these boards you can probably see looking at them from the top, but you can see it more easily if we look at them from the end, and as you can see here, the heatsink is slimmer on the Odroid N2 Plus, so the whole board is not quite so tall. The next difference, if we come back to the top, is very easy to see. You could probably see it from space with a reasonable telescope. And the difference is that on the N2, the real-time clock battery is on a flying lead, flying around like that, whereas on the N2 Plus, it's actually on a holder on the board. It's very unusual to see a holder for a real-time clock battery on the board on a single-board computer. I do like that as an innovation. And the final difference, which is completely irrelevant for most purposes, but I have spotted it, you might have spotted it too, is that the N2 Plus is actually screwed down, bolted down to the heatsink, whereas there are plastic retainer clips holding the heatsink to the board on the N2. So there we are. Those are the differences between the N2 and the N2 Plus. Now, other than those features I've just mentioned, an Odroid N2 Plus is identical to an Odroid N2. But just in case the specification of an Odroid N2 isn't electrochemically etched into your brain, let's run through the specs here. Starting with a system on a chip, this is under the board, got this massive heatsink on the base of the board on top of the system on a chip, great heatsink for a single board computer, nicely passively cooled, although you can add a fan as well if you really wish, but the system on the chip here is that Amlogic S922X revision C. It's a hexacore system on the chip with those 4 A73 cores running at 2.2 GHz and those 2 A53 cores running at 1.9 GHz. And there's also an ARM Mali G52MP6 GPU running at 846 MHz and either 2 or 4 GB of memory, 2 GB of DDR4 on this board, which is also on the base of the board between the board and the heatsink. If we flip the board back the right way up, always keep it happy, so keep it to the right way up, and we turn to the main connector edge, you'll see we've got gigabit Ethernet, we've got a full-size HDMI 2.0 socket offering 4K at up to 60 frames a second. We've got 4 USB 3 ports, we've got some system LEDs just hiding down there, and we've got a barrel jack for power which requires a 12 volt at 2 amps. Rotating around, we find a 40-pin GPIO connector. That's all we've really got to mention on this side of the board. But if we spin 90 again, we find a 3.5mm stereo audio and composite video jack. Next to that, we've got a micro USB 2.0 OTG port. Next to that, we've got an SBI boot selector switch for setting the boot priority. Next to that, we've got an eMMC socket for fitting an eMMC module to the board, which can be either 8, 16, 32, 64 or 128 GB. Next to that, we've got an IR receiver. Next to that, we've got our microSD card slot, so we can boot from microSD card or eMMC depending on what we want to do. And then finally, we've got a UART connector. Moving around for a final time, we find nothing of interest whatsoever. I should have saved the UART socket, shouldn't I? But I didn't. That's life. Never mind. So let's go back to the top of the board, where we can marvel once again at the onboard real-time clock battery. And the final feature I'll point out is this, which is a 2-pin fan connector. You really don't need to use a fan with this board because it's got this very large heatsink as we've seen under the board already, but as you might have noticed earlier, there are mountings for a fan. There are 4 screw holes there. You can put quite a large fan on the base of this board and connect it to that 2-pin fan header. And so there we are. This is the Odroid N2 Plus, a very powerful ARM-based single board computer. But I do have to finish off the specification section here by noting what is not on the board. For a start, we don't have a camera port, we don't have an LCD display port, and more importantly, I think anyway, we don't have onboard Wi-Fi or onboard Bluetooth. And I know some people will say that really doesn't matter, for certain applications you don't need them, and that is true, but it is a little bit strange having such a powerful single board computer and not having onboard Wi-Fi and Bluetooth. Greetings, here I am back again, and as you can see we've now got the Odroid N2 Plus all connected up and running. And there's even this nice little blue LED flashing a heartbeat there to show us the board is alive. And it is nice to have a single board computer where all of the connectors plug into one edge. I've got an operating system installed on this 16GB eMMC flash module, and that operating system is this. Here we're running Ubuntu MATE 18.04, which runs very nicely indeed here on the Odroid N2 Plus. If I just go up to the menu, you'll see everything is nice and responsive, and I would point out it's very important when you first install this operating system to run the software updater. Now, you should always run the software updater when you've installed a new operating system anyway, but here if you don't run the software updater, you'll find your processor cores run at Odroid N2 speeds, not Odroid N2 Plus speeds. So if you want to get the most out of the hardware, you must run the software updater. Other than that, there's lots of things here pre-installed. I've added GIMP so we can use it in the test in the next segment of the video. Under Internet, we've got the standard things like the Firefox web browser, Thunderbird, etc. This is just a nice install. And if we run up the system monitor, you'll see we've got our 6 processor cores. There they are in their different colors. We've got our 2 gigabytes of memory. And let's just run up Firefox. Always good to run up a browser. And there it is. You'll see it comes up pretty quickly for an ARM-based single board computer. Oh look, the world's favorite website. And also here we've got the wiki from Odroid, which shows you why I'm running Ubuntu MATE 18.04, because it's one of the 2 operating systems made available by hard kernel for the board, the other being an Android Pi. I'm sure we'll have a quick look at that later in the video. And one of the things I would note here, which I think is slightly strange, is this is a download page for the Odroid N2. And these images work for the Odroid N2 Plus, at least once you've run the software updated to get full performance from them. But I do think it's very strange that hard kernel don't even mention the N2 Plus on this page. Surely there should be the Odroid N2 and N2 Plus page, or there should be a separate N2 Plus page. It's weird when a manufacturer puts a board out and doesn't really do the maximum it can to support it, if only in terms of web content. We've also here got access to third-party images. There's quite a few of these potentially available now, more than they were when I first looked at the N2 back in the end of 2019. You'll see we've got Debian, Stretch, Manjaro, all these sort of things here. Although note, these are not all entirely, I think, official images. If you click on, say, Manjaro ARM there, you'll find the page goes to somewhere it doesn't exist. Fair enough, pages move around. But if I go to the Manjaro website, which is over there, just let that load in, try Manjaro, will hopefully take us to some downloads, look at additions, look at ARM, and you don't find any Odroid board, let alone the N2, sitting down here. So clearly there are lots of images available now for the Odroid N2. I hear great things about the N2 in terms of the community, but it is still very much a community-based board with a community-based software support. And let's just close these things down and do what we always do, which is to run a YouTube video to see what playback is like. We'll bring up my standard test clip and send it full screen, hopefully any hour now. There we are, and that'll play away. And my experience here is the YouTube playback is very, very good in the browser here in Ubuntu MATE on the Odroid N2 Plus. We've got almost no drop frames there, 2 so far. Playback is excellent. So if you want to have good YouTube playback on a single board computer in a standard operating system in the browser, I can very much recommend the N2 Plus. It's working very well indeed. So this is clearly very good news for this particular single board computer. Right, everything now looks exactly the same, except it isn't, because I'm now running on the Odroid N2, not the N2 Plus, because I want to compare the performance of the 2 boards. So I've installed the hard kernel image of Ubuntu MATE on the N2 so we can do a comparative test. And just to show you we really are on the Odroid N2, I've installed hard info with a sudo apt install hard info. And if I run up hard info like that and maximize it there, you will see if we look under a processor down there, we've got our 6 cores, the first 2, the A53s, running at effectively 1.9 gigahertz, range is down here 667 to 1.9, and our A73 cores are running at 1.8 gigahertz, 667 to 1.8. So clearly on the Odroid N2, and if we go back to here, I'm going to run a sysbench command to do a test of the CPU speed. And the command we're going to use is this one. Again, I've pre-installed sysbench using a sudo apt install sysbench. And this command is going to factor prime numbers up to a value of 100,000. Threads equals 6 because we've got 6 processor cores. And then I've set here time equals 0, events equal 10,000, because the latest version of sysbench is normally limited by time rather than events. This will cause it not to be limited by time, and we can see how long it'll take to perform this operation and compare it to the N2 Plus. So let's press enter, see what result we get. Very exciting, isn't it? Let's see what the Odroid N2 will do. Oh, it almost rhymes, doesn't it? There we are, thread started. I'll keep wittering something whilst we get a result. We'll see it in real time. It's always exciting watching things in real time, isn't it? How are you today? I hope you're very well indeed. And come on, give us a result, computer. Oh, there we are. And we've got a result. It took 24.6 seconds. So remember that 24.6 for the Odroid N2, and we'll transition across to the Odroid N2 Plus. And here we are, we're on now another computer, and I can prove it if I run hard info here, and we bring that up and look to processor. There you will see that our A53 cores going effectively the same speed at 1.9 GHz, but our A73 cores are at that 2.2 GHz, the 667 to 2.2 GHz range. So we're clearly on a faster computer. So let's now run sysbench again. There we are, same command, and press enter. And we know it took, what was it, 24.6 something seconds on the Odroid N2. What will it take on the N2 Plus? If it isn't less time, the world has got something seriously wrong with the space-time continuum. But hopefully in a second we will get a result. Oh, it's exciting, isn't it? Can we take the stress and the pressure? There we are. Ah, yes, we've got a 20.81 seconds. So clearly the Odroid N2 Plus really is faster in the real world than the Odroid N2. That's very good to see. And I wouldn't mind doing another graphical test, because I like doing graphical tests. So let's run up GIMP, which seems to be version 2.8 by default here on the N2 in this version of Ubuntu MATE, what was it, 18, whatever it was. What am I doing? I'm creating a new document, I think, which is going to be 1000 by 1000 pixels, which is going to be like that. And I'm going to go to filter, and I'm going to go to render, and I'm going to go to lava, and then I'll bring up on the other side of the screen the Odroid N2, and then by the magic of filmmaking I'll start these off together, and there we are. This takes a little time to apply this filter, so it's a good test. We should find that the Odroid N2 Plus wins. If it doesn't, we've got that problem with the space-time continuum again, but I don't think we'll have it. What are we going to find? Odroid N2 Plus is finished, and the Odroid N2 will come up and finish. There we are. We have proved that computers with faster processors complete tasks more quickly than computers with slower processors. Right, let's now have a whistle-stop tour of other operating systems running on the Odroid N2 Plus. And as you can see, we're starting out with Android. This is the Android version 9 installation image made available by Hardkernel on their website. And it's not the best install of Android in the world. It's not the worst either. There's not a lot pre-installed, as you can see. The Play Store isn't pre-installed here. I'm sure you could mess around and install Play Store if you wanted to, but some other single-board computer manufacturers do include the Play Store in their standard image, so it's sad not to see it here. But we do have a nice settings panel for the Odroid there. We can go, for example, to the CPU and change the clock speeds. Go up to 2400 overclock if we wanted to. That's rather nice. And that's basically, I think, all I'm going to say. So let's now move on to another operating system. And specifically, as you can see, we're now in Diet Pi, and you can configure Diet Pi in all kinds of different ways when you set it up. Here I've got it running an LXDE desktop. This is a lightweight install, so there's not much pre-installed. That's the whole idea, but it seems to work pretty well. It's pretty responsive. And in fact, if we go to the internet, we launch Firefox. I've got this set up to do my standard YouTube video playback, which has been working pretty well. It's taking a second just to come up. Come up, come up. Work for us. There we are. If we just maximize that, and it'll play, hopefully. That doesn't look like HD to me. Make sure it's in HD. There we are. Doing a bit of buffering, and as you can hopefully see, this is working pretty well indeed. So I'm surprised by that, actually. We've got good YouTube playback again, and another desktop operating system here, Diet Pi on the Odroid N2 Plus. And talking of video playback, let's move on to CoreELEC, which is a very nice implementation of Kodi for Amlogic devices. So if you want to turn an N2 Plus into a standalone media player, you may well want to use CoreELEC. And I've not got all of this set up, as you can see, but the basis is here. All the standard Kodi stuff is available. Let's just go to videos and files, and I've got a drive in there with a critical file on it. Let's just play that file, and there we are. Lots of ducks are now moving around on the screen in this video being played on the N2 Plus. But the real point I wanted to make here to close this section is that there's now a wide choice of operating systems available to install on Odroid N2 hardware. The Odroid N2 Plus is a very powerful ARM-based single-board computer with an increasing level of software support. Personally, I would have liked to have seen Wi-Fi added to the Plus version of the N2, but even without it, it remains a very nice board. But now that's it for another video. If you've enjoyed what you've seen here, please press that like button. If you haven't subscribed, please subscribe, and I hope to talk to you again very soon.